You are listening to Mining Stock Education, where you'll learn from the top leaders in the natural resource sector and uncover quality mining investment opportunities.
Thanks for tuning in to MSC. I'm your host, Bill Powers. And in today's show, we are going to talk about networking, the importance of what can be done in today's day and age, especially if you're an American retail investor, let's say. Can you network your way into good deals and the right connections, the right relationships in Vancouver and Toronto? So I asked a master networker, somebody who has accomplished a lot of things, and much of that came through networking. Tommy Humphreys. Tommy, you started CEO.ca. You're the founder. You built that and sold it off for a multi-million-dollar gain. Congratulations on that. And now, I don't know if I would call you a blogger or a writer/podcaster at thebigscore.com. That's your current work, so congratulations on your success. And I asked you to come on the show. Could you share with my audience, if they're an average Joe retail investor, can they network their way to success in the junior mining sector?
I think you have to, right? You have to. Whether you're a technology venture investor or a mining venture investor, you're in a high-risk space, right? And most of the value is going to accrue to the specialists, whether in tech, I'm thinking of somebody like Mark Andreessen, or in mining like a Rick Rule, or somebody who is the known entity in that space that has the expertise and the relationships, or one of the founders in a success story, or one of the early employees. So we're assuming at the beginning that we're in a dangerous territory, and most of the value is going to be shared amongst founders, employees, and expert capital in hubs like Silicon Valley, Toronto, and Vancouver. Silicon Valley being more of a technology example. But I think that, certainly in tech, and I believe in resources, you find a lot of success happening outside of these hubs. Canada, in so many ways, is losing its dominance in the mining space, and the Australian markets are healthier. There's a big community in Arizona and also in Colorado where there is a lot of mining expertise. I've typically experienced a lot of high quality people are actually outside of the Canadian. I don't want to say toilet bowl, but like in Canada, you are conditioned to the Bay Street, Howe Street formula, which is lots of deals. Maybe they're more. There's more of a portfolio approach. People are trying to start lots of things, enrich themselves. And when I meet founders and specialists from outside, it's often really refreshing because they might have more of a focused approach or long-term approach. So a lot of great talent comes from outside of those markets, but they often come here. And like, I'm in Vancouver, and this is a place where typically resource venture projects are sprung and listed. And so oftentimes it's talent from outside that's coming and pairing with the Canadian disclosure standards, regulatory governance, and capital for a new public company listing so there's obviously like a ton of talent outside comes here for a part of the process. But so regarding building a network, if I'm going to think about like you and I both have the experience of the power of talking to people through interviews. And, I feel like, the butcher who tells, the customer to have steak. But like for me, building a network happened because of writing and interviewing people. And so it's unfair for me to say that...
Not the web business, Tommy? Wasn't the web business a tool for networking as well?
Well, it certainly was. But before CEO.ca was a community site, which it grew into, it was a site where me talking to CEOs, so CEO.ca. And before that, before I had the $3,000 I used to buy that domain, I was doing it on TommyHump.com, which is it's defunct.
I like thebigscore.com better.
Thank you. It resonated with me. For me, talking to CEOs and writing and being in front of the mining investment community and the mining issuer community. I mean, that was I think the unlock, right? So with social media now, I feel like I have this article on thebigscore.com. It's called Greed Proverbs, and it's a collection of like sort of jokes about, you know, what I've observed is maybe 40 or 50 quotes, but one of them is to get two powerful men publish favorably about their favorite stock. And it was sort of a joke, but it's like this aphrodisiac of influential people. If you are on social media in any way, and that's on CEO.ca or Twitter, which was a great one, or LinkedIn, and you have something to share or something you learn, you can get attention in a levered way. And I remember the first time I ever wrote an article in 2008 or 9. It took me four months to write 250 words. So I can relate to not feeling confident as a writer. But ChatGPT, et cetera, Grok on Twitter, these tools really help clarify your words. And, there's so many ways that you could add value with writing and posting on social media, whether it's just simply summarizing what's in a company's filing.
So are you saying to get the attention of a person of means or influence in the mining sector, you have to be an attention getter yourself? Is that what I hear you saying, or no?
I'm not saying you have to. I'm saying that we've decided at the beginning, my first thesis was that most of the value is going to the experts and the founders and their employees of deals. So like, if you're not going to be one of those people, you're taking higher risk and you're going to get a smaller part of the pie. That's just a fact. But if you want to meet people and you're not in one of these communities, by publishing, you'll probably get on people's radars. You're sharing comments, thoughts, adding value. So like, I would think that if I wanted to expedite my network, I would be certainly sharing on social media. I would be sharing and engaging with other people. I would be myself. I would try to be constructive rather than maybe being anonymous and negative. There's a ton of deserved negativity in our space, right? It's a space where the majority of deals are value destructive, and there's a lot of reasons why everything can go wrong. The longest section in all of the company filings, Bill, as you know, is the risk factors. So it's easy to dunk on these companies.
And they make you put your initials next to each of the risks too, right, Tommy? When you do a private placement, it's like initial here, initial here.
You will lose all your money. You will not have any information.
You might never hear from the company again. Initial here.
But you don't have to do that in the public market, and it's arguably riskier, but you don't have to do that when you buy a lottery ticket either. I think what my point was, if in my case, like, I was so eager and I recognized that, like, I'm going to catch more bees with honey. And I've been criticized deservedly for being, in the worst case, I've been called a sycophant by critics online and a bootlicker. But if you have not such a negative focus, then you're really going to get people's attention, right? And I'm not saying you should be buying what everybody's saying. You have to be a cynic in this sector. A cynic, but an optimist at times. You will be able to build so many better relationships if you're one of the more positive voices. And so writing and positivity. I think there's a Dale Carnegie quote. It's like, if you want someone to like you, focus on liking them.
So what's the difference between flattery, which for me is a turnoff, besides like genuine compliments? So for example, I started off this interview with 2 compliments. I said, you built the business and you sold it for millions of dollars. Like, to me, that's an accomplishment. Congratulations.
I was very fortunate to, thank you.
Yeah. So that's a genuine compliment, but what's the difference between flattery? Because if someone is crossing the line into flattery, I start to question, like, okay, what's their true motive here versus someone is just genuinely acknowledging something that's true about somebody else?
It's a really good question. Like, I've watched some of my interviews in the past, and I think it's a nervous reaction personally, where, like, I did an interview in the fall with somebody that I respected, but then I watched at the beginning and I was like, I said, like, you're the best in the world at this. And I was just like, Tommy, like, you're trying to make this person like you. And it's because I'm insecure. But so, I did mean it, but at the same time, I think I learned insecurely that if I, was kind of like positive, that they might like me too. So I have to rein it in myself. I'm not, it's not, it might be manipulative. Like you just said, and it's a turnoff amongst the audience. So there is a line there, but it's, I didn't say you have to be, pumping these people's tires, but you do have to, if you are going to be anonymous if you're even going to write, if you're going to be anonymous and you're going to be negative, don't expect to build a community of optimists, the people who are trying to build these companies. You'll build a community of people who are like you, and they're negative on stories. And those aren't the people that...
The bitter brigade.
Yeah, and the bitter brigade have every right to be bitter. But those people are likely going to... There's always exceptions in this space, but it's unusual that those people are going to be in the room when something great is happening, or will have the optimism. Like, you have to kind of cultivate your optimism in the space if you're beat up so much. So,
Tommy, when you were developing your network or reaching out to people of means or influence, did you find that anybody actually invested in you for more altruistic reasons, not because they said, oh, okay, I see he's a go-getter, I'm going to be able to get something out of him in the future? Like, what was that relational exchange like?
I can't say what the motives of others were, but I had a lot of experiences where people, I just found a lot. I've said this before, that you'll never find a nicer lot of people than the junior resource market, because they always need money. I mean, that's the thesis I have. And so is the mentee in the situation, or sorry, is the mentor in the situation? I mean, there's always a quid pro quo of generosity, right? And sometimes you could do something altruistic because it makes you feel good, and that's a quid pro quo of a respect. And but clearly, when you identify young, hungry, optimistic people, there's something to be gained from it. If you're whatever, a CEO or whomever, but I just found a lot of okay, Bill, if you think it's not that different to say, I think I can make money off this young kid, as I think I could feel good if I help them. I mean, in both senses, there's something selfish in it. That's like human nature. But I found a lot of people, like when I was first in this space, and I'd be happy to share some of the stories, like I found a lot of people that would talk to me and tell me different things. And I was just trying to synthesize it. What direction should I take? Because I was a web designer trying to learn about this market, and I had the advantage of being in Vancouver. My family was not in the mining space or the mining investment space or resource.
It advised you against it, right? If I understand your story.
Yeah, I mean, my father's very cynical in a good way, but he was he was part of the wealth preservation focus, whereas like, this is dangerous. Accept a accept a modest return, and have a good day job, have a good life. He was not trying to go get rich and starting new companies or whatever. So his attitude was, I think he had seen firsthand that people lost money, and what's rule number one if you're trying to preserve wealth? Don't lose your money, right? So he was negative about it. My mom, I think, went along with him a little bit, but she was more of a, like, her spirit was a little bit more of a gambler. Like if I talk to her about an idea, like, she's so funny. She's like, "Whoa, should I buy some?" She's got more of a gambler's instinct. But at the beginning, I didn't think it was for me. I also had this one experience when I was a kid, and my dad and I were in the city. I was about 12 years old, and there was a mining executive that we knew, and he was sitting. It was absolutely pouring rain. It was November. And he was sitting in a bus stop, and he just looked like the saddest man I'd ever seen. And my dad, and this was in probably 1998, which was a serious mining downturn. And it was raining. He was wet. He was slouched over. And this image was like burned in my mind. It's like, yeah, he was riding high in the bull market, mining bull market, but like, this is a dangerous space. And he just looked super sad. And so that stuck with me for 15 years after that. Like, this is dangerous. People get hurt, and So I came sort of slowly into it. It was actually having having had my own business trials that I came back to it after, like everybody does. I got sucked into it after a long bull market. And after the 2000s period, there were just so many stories of Vancouver companies that went, that did really well and had old projects. And so there were too many, like, it's a dangerous thing when the sight of a neighbor getting rich, and not that my neighbors were, but like, there were just so many stories of money made in this boom that, like, I planted my flag down in the junior resource sector in approximately August 1st, 2010. And I was like, there was 4 or 5 months left, and it was over. So people come into it at the end of that. That's what it took for me to forget the image of the man at the bus stop in the rain who looked sad, to think, oh, I could do this. But
you didn't make money for like 8 years later, though, right? Before you really got your first breakthrough.
That's true, but I didn't. Wasn't 8 years. It was 6. It was 6 years, but that was a long time, right? And that was 6 years of being absolutely focused on. I had the advantage, and now I'm a father, and like, you couldn't have endured for as long as I had if you had dependents, and I didn't need anything. I didn't have high expenses, and I was just absolutely determined. Like I said, like, I believed to myself. I thought that if this boom and bust had happened over and over and over, why wouldn't it again? And if I just stuck around, at that point, I had given up the hope of, I wasn't expecting an imminent payoff, but in my past business doing the web design thing, I was a little, I had a long-term view for the first time, which was like, let's wait this out. And I didn't come close to giving up, but come 2015, after 5 years, like, it was my faith was low. And then everything turned. But what was I going to try to say? Yeah, those years I had incredible experiences, and I met so many people, and those were the most formative years for me for my networking.
And you would ring up people you don't know, Tommy, or would you ask for intros from friends, or how did you grow that network?
Well, my first mining relationship, there were two that I had. I mean, one was this dear friend from my childhood, Andrew Pollard. I don't know if you know him, but
not personally, but
he's the CEO
BlackRock.
of BlackRock
Yep.
Silver, and he and I were best of friends in kindergarten, and our dads worked together 100 years ago. And he and I were both sort of chubby kids, and we gravitated to each other, and we both were obsessed with the same girl in kindergarten, and we'd follow her around and just like look, like we'd hide behind a rock, and like, just like, we were goofs, awkward kids, but Andrew was very funny and still is. And his family moved to Ireland in the 12th grade, and Andrew lived with my dad and I in high school for, I don't know, for 6 months or a year, but that's a long time when you're a kid. And he was so smart and strategic that right after high school, he was very good at positioning, and he's like, I'm going to get into mining executive search. And I was like, what? Like, what are you talking about? Like, what's executive search? What's mining? And, he had this vision that, doing HR for the mining industry would be lucrative. He was so tactical with public relations that I learned from him. Like, he created a survey. I'm telling Andrew's stories right now, but he was probably 20 years old, and he created the mining recruitment group, mining executive survey. And he sent it to, I don't know, 15 or 20 people he didn't know. And he got a very small data set out of it. But then he put out a press release and announced the results. And all of a sudden he's on the business news talking in a suit at 21 or something like that, talking about mining executives are fearful. And so he branded himself as this winner, and he made way more money than I did as a young man, because these searches that he was doing, I mean, he was just mining LinkedIn and building a network, but I watched him do it, and I was like, wow, this was really visionary. But it still took me another 5 years to follow him. But Andrew subsequently left the recruitment, now running a deal. I love him dearly. He's absolutely irascible, fun person. But I was I was a very ambitious young guy, and I was in some ways in the wrong field. I was doing web design because, I was very passionate about the internet, and so taking from Andrew, I had this idea that public relations was powerful, and I mentioned that my first article took 4 months to write 250 words, but that was an opportunity that I could write for our local business publication. It was called BC Business, and I started writing about web design, and it was labor, but because I was a 23-year-old who was writing in the BC Business and stuff, like a peer group of young people in their 20s invited me to join them, and I didn't know any of them. And there were like young guys in different fields who were recognizing other young people, and they were meeting for breakfast every 6 or 8 weeks to talk about their goals and vision. And man, that was so valuable for me because it just fueled the fire that I had. And so when I went through the transformation of web design is not scaling, like my revenues are growing, but my profits are not, my quality of life is not. And I didn't have it wasn't good enough to have a breakthrough software product as some of my peers did. I was really hitting a wall there. There was a guy in that group, and I guess I'll out him. His name is Nolan Watson. I don't know if you've ever talked to him.
Sandstorm?
He was about 9 years older than me, and by far the most impressive young person that I had met. And he was so different than me. He was so controlled. Like I was not a great student, but Nolan had.
You mean disciplined when you say controlled?
Is that disciplined? Yeah. I mean, like drives with 2 hands on the wheel. Sorry, Nolan. Like
I'm trying to get my sons to do that.
Yeah. He has like a 1600 SAT score. Like he was like the best, and he was the hardest working. And then he got a job as the CFO of Silver Wheaton on the launch. And Silver Wheaton went from a concept of, hey, how do we separate the values of the metals in a mine, to 10 billion, now 30 billion market cap unicorn. And he was there at the genesis of it. And so that silver streaming concept was something that was born around him, and he was mentored by incredible people, and it was a very institutional story. And in 2008, Nolan decided that he would start his own gold streaming and royalties company.
Sandstorm was my first sponsor, by the way.
Was it?
Yeah, they reached out to me in 2018 and said we'd like to sponsor. So I have an affection for them being the first show sponsor.
Well, the difference between you and I never got any money out of them. But I could see how that you were aligned with him because his values, he has very strong values and a culture. So he was just an incredibly impressive person to me, that he had this, like, I thought he had, and I still believe he had, like this immense integrity and incredible intelligence and work ethic. And he was just like absolutely determined. So I'm going through this business failure, and I sort of know this guy from these business breakfasts who raised $100 million in the peak of the financial crisis to launch his own gold royalties company. It was like, $100 million? Like what? And I remember visiting at the office. This was in 2010, that year that I had the sort of a devastating crisis with my business, and there was a bottle of champagne on ice. Not that he was drinking it, but like, so you just show up at this office, and then there's a champagne bucket with champagne in it, and I see Nolan for some moments, and he's not imbibing, and he looks like he hasn't slept, but he's been on a road show for 8 days, and he's like clearly physically, mentally exhausted. But they had done a huge funding for another deal. They did Sandstorm Metals and Energy, and so it was just like, I was like, wow, what is this world, and what is he doing? And so he was so successful. He was like a cut above an average Vancouver story. Sandstorm is 2 billion market cap. So they have the liquidity and the asset base that's much greater than your typical Vancouver story. But I was incredibly turned on by that experience. I was just like, wow, like what
Tommy, if we could just recap for listeners here as we continue the conversation. So some of the things I'm hearing you say, the actionable steps for listeners: find somebody to be inspired by, take initiative, find out what your value add is, open a Twitter account, open a CEO.ca account, research, share some of your thoughts. And just those simple steps is like, that's overcoming the initial inertia for especially some of the retail listeners. Is that a good kind of summary?
I apologize, Bill. You did a great job of summarizing that. Without a doubt, being inspired, making a commitment, and beginning. And just if I can add this, the center of influence comment. So I went from doing web design to working as a web designer, marketing coordinator for a mining investment conference. And that was so valuable for me because that was where all the juniors were coming. It was a little marketplace that took place.
And you're getting paid to learn. Would that be accurate?
Not much,
too?
But yeah.
Okay, a little.
Enough. And it was so valuable. So a center of influence is a concept that's like, your show is a center of influence. You've got all these influential people coming, them all, you have an incredible audience. Like that's a center of influence. If you're a stockbroker, maybe a center of influence could be like an accountant who's got a bunch of clients that could send you referrals or whatever. But like, if you want to fish where the fish are, and a mining conference is like a pretty good place to meet everybody. And so working at that trade show is a game changer for me. Now, you could just be an attendee and get a lot of the same value, but for me, I had the.
And don't you think an attendee should just create a business card and say, hey, I'm Joe Schmo, private investor. Here's my Twitter account. Here's my YouTube account, and just hand it out, right? You got to start somewhere.
I don't care. Do you? It's been a while since I've had a business card, Bill. Do you?
I have a box of them in my closet that I don't bring with me anymore. To your point, however,
a relic. But you're Bill Powers. You don't need it.
Well, no. Yes. But I mean, I still think that if you're starting out, or you give them something like, what's the point of contact? Otherwise, they just say, hey, I remember that nice guy. He was about 6'1", but I don't remember his name. You got to come up with some touch point so that they can access you.
What's there was I don't know if it's like a Sun Tzu law, but it's like power perceived is power achieved. And you hand me a business card that says Bill Powers, private investor, and you post online, intelligent comments about things. I'm going to be impressed. I'm going to be interested. And so what does that means? That's LinkedIn. I think a business card is like LinkedIn now.
Tommy, to that point, I've had one-on-one meetings like at Beaver Creek with CEOs, and they'll ask me, hey, do you know this user on Twitter? So a lot of the CEOs even follow some of the more intelligent people on Twitter, don't they, to this point that we're making?
Without a doubt. I mean, we don't have analyst coverage in the junior market very much. Some advanced projects do, but there's just been this giant sea change where the bank research is not economic and the bank focus has moved away from the space. So typically these companies, they often trade less than 100,000 shares a day, which might be $40,000 of volume. So like what people are saying is very important. And it may look like a backwater on the CEO.ca boards, which can often be it's a lot of noise, and same with Twitter. But when there's no audience and there's no research coverage of that story, it's really important. It's not everything. If you can find a constituency, as Rick Rule says, like if you can cultivate investors and have relationships, but if you're trying to stimulate new attention, like as you know, if the pre-revenue company needs more money, its terms are going to be set on the share price. It has to have a buyer of the market in the market for it to be able to raise money at attractive terms for existing holders. So it's very useful for a CEO to get leverage for his communication if people are what they're saying about it. And that's why, they're all listening. And I know a very influential family that's encouraging their CEOs to participate. There is disclosure issues, I think, with CEOs posting themselves, and there have been some. It's some gray. Certainly, what they post needs to be publicly disclosed, but they're definitely listening. And if it's such a small audience for the story, somebody who's saying something constructive all I have to do is contact two people and I can triangulate something, some context about what's going on there. And so if I'm thinking about building relationships, it's like, how do I add value and how do I like save time, you know? And if you're meeting somebody, like, you know, I would, in times I would offer to work for free or to, you know, can I, you know, buy you a coffee and come by for 15 minutes? And if you don't have any time, is there somebody I could drop off a coffee for you, help you out? Just like, how do I add value and save somebody's time? And so that, I think that is a secret. Like, you know, when someone asks you for an hour that you're busy, and if it's not clear what they want, you're like, you want to help people, you know, it helped you earlier, but like, if somebody's direct, asking, you're seeing evidence of them worthy of your time, they're going to be more inclined to want to help you.
Tommy, in your experience, like, so there was someone that approached me that says, hey, this young man would like you to mentor him. This is in my local social network. And I said to the person that approached me, I said, okay, just so you know, if I want him to ask me, not somebody that knows him, number one. Number two, if he asks me, I'm just telling you, I'm going to have him read this book and I'm going to give him a book assignment. And our first meeting together, we'll be discussing that book. And if he's not willing to jump through those hoops, that I'm not going to waste my time, because I want a return on my investment, even if I'm doing it for altruistic motives.
What's the book?
Oh, I was going to give him a cash flow quadrant, because he was thinking about, should I be an employee or should I go into business? So I was going to give him Kiyosaki's cash flow quadrant, where it talks about the different profiles and, you know, a guy who owns a business, but it's really just owning a job, versus a true business owner versus an employee, what level of risk you're willing to take, and just kind of help him to think through that. But I give that as an example. Have you approached somebody in the Vancouver or Toronto sphere, and then they've given you a task or a hurdle to jump over to see, is this guy willing to do what I say, or how serious is he about seeking me out?
I love the story that you shared. And I think that we want to solve other people's problems. Most people, we want to help people, but like, the person who deserves your help is helping themselves, right? And so you have to be the person who asks. You cannot give your faith to somebody else. Like, when the friend or the father asks you to talk to them, like, you do it, but it's the kid that has to show the initiative, or the person, or it's just not going to work. But in my case, I can vividly remember, I wrote a story about this on thebigscore.com about a prominent hedge fund manager. I don't want to say his name because I respect him, and I just don't want to create a controversy. But I had met a guy at the gym in Vancouver, and he was in this field, and I talked to him about the junior market, and he said, you got to talk to this guy. And so like I'd gone from the gym to this hedge fund manager's office, and my friend from the gym said, like, he thought I had promise. And so I was sort of auditioning for an opportunity with him. And I was so keen to learn. And he said, what's your favorite stock? And I said, oh, like, I didn't know really any. I guess I was like, well, Sandstorm, you know, because and he said, okay, come back tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. and I want you to completely rewrite the Sandstorm presentation and come pitch this to me. Let me see what you have. And I was like, I didn't know anything about. I stayed up all night trying to redo a perfect presentation. Sandstorm they do not lack at investor communications. And I went there to try to pitch this story. And I did my best. I remember I had bags in my eyes because I'd been up all night rehearsing, and it was 6. And I looked like a mortician when I showed up there.
You're stepping up to the opportunity. That's the point. You're stepping up to the opportunity.
Well, I was desperate, and it didn't pan out. The crazy part about the story was he said, okay, well, come back on Wednesday. We can talk about this. And on Wednesday morning, I emailed him at 7 in the morning. I said, what time, you still want me to come at 11? He didn't respond. And so at 11, I was assuming it was off. And at 11:05, he emailed me and said, where are you? And I was in a different part of Vancouver. I was like 15 minutes away, like minimum. And I like sprinted to this office. And I came to the door, so it was now 11:17, and I knocked on the door. I could see he was there, and he came to his door. And so there was a door that I was on the outside of, and then there was his door to his office and a bit of a lobby. So I could see through the glass door. He came to his office door, gave me a glance, didn't smile or anything, and then closed his door. And it was just like, oh my God, I felt completely dejected. But he had done me a great favor, because obviously, like, I wasn't emotionally the right partner for him, but I learned in that night to get better. I got an opportunity to pitch a hedge fund. So it was a huge learning experience.
Some people would never attempt again. Okay. So you were given the opportunity. You stepped up. By what I mean by that is you prepared, right? You were willing to pursue. You didn't shrink away from the opportunity. The door literally gets slammed in your face, but you didn't give up there. Many people will give up there, Tommy, and they'll feel sorry for themselves, go into self-pity mode. But what did you do next?
I didn't have a backup. I didn't have another plan. And, I had met another mentor at that time. Actually, no, maybe that was a bit later, but I kept having these conversations. I kept going to the conferences. I kept willingness. And one thing I was obsessed with the information. Like, these are all mining books behind me. And like, I still order these random books all the time, and I want to know everything. And so like, I'm genuinely interested in the history of stuff and how things worked, and I'm trying to learn it, and that's infectious, I think, with people who are in it. So it's like, I'm not saying like but I was not giving up. I also didn't have another option, but one rejection isn't fatal. But that was devastating. I just kept going, and I went to an investor lunch for a gold company that was $3 a share at the time, or $2.50 a share. And it subsequently went to like 3 cents or 4 cents or something. And it's now 15 years later being restarted. Good project. Anyway, but the point being, at this lunch was a prospector, and this prospector and I sat beside each other, and this guy and I were it just like clicked. And I was so interested in everything that he had learned and done, and that we started spending time together. And this prospector, gave me such he sparked my curiosity so much, because he was explaining how, like, the business is really about the projects. Obviously, it's about the money and the people, but the people, they'll depend on the projects. And to learn about how projects were staked, traded, how option agreements were taking place, how companies were mistaking fractions in their major projects, and like there could be a gold mine deposit and it might have a big footprint, but like they accidentally didn't stake this little piece in it. And there's all these little crazy stories about the projects, but particularly the dealings of the prospector for me was just like the biggest learning curve that happened. I was like, oh my God, and a sponge for him. And he would never, I don't think he would like, if I call him a mentor, he would be awkward. But like, I learned so much. I was so inspired. So I continued to find people. Some would reject me, but some I would be really inspired by.
And Tommy, just if I could relate the point you're making to a previous point we've made for listeners. So they open their Twitter, or they have it, or they have their CEO.ca username, and they start posting. People start noticing that, and people get invited to site tours. If they don't have that firsthand field experience, or they haven't spent 3 days with the prospector, some of the people that just post intelligent things, you'll get invited to the Yukon tour, or you'll get invited to see 3 projects in Nevada that 3 companies are organizing. I've seen this happen. So yeah, what I'm trying to help people with is, you say, well, that's Tommy Humphreys. Well, it's Tommy Humphreys now, but at that time, Tommy Humphreys didn't have these connections, but you're making these steps, and then an educational door opens.
Yes. The issuers are very, like, they're holding a constant roadshow. They're always trying to tell their story. So there's always going to be a lunch, and they come to random US cities, so St. Louis or wherever they're coming, and they're very keen to build a relationship to help to find a new audience. So if you are somebody who has posted about the company online, and in a constructive way, it doesn't have to be positive. It just like in a constructive way that's like adds value to the people out there, like, they're going to talk to you. And then if you tell them, hey, I'm that guy, I've made those posts, and like, I'd really like to see the site, Like I cornered Robert Friedland on the escalator at PDAC. I'd never met him. And I convinced him to take me to Congo for a site visit. And I've said this before, but
did you get him to pay for it, or did you have to pay for it?
I flew there.
Okay.
But once I got to Africa, they were hosting, they had a investor tour, because they do that every few months. They're holding analyst tours and trips. They're trying to show people what they're doing. And I stopped him on the escalator, and he was, he's the legend of mining. And I think his first words.
What was your intro? Tell listeners your intro. You can find me on the web at TommyHump.com.
Randomly, he was speaking at a event in Toronto somewhere, and he gave his email in that pitch. And I was so inspired. And at those times, I was like listening to what he was writing, and I made a story about what he wrote. And I was clearly a fan. I mean, like he was a legend. He inspired me in a colorful, different, intense, super success. He's had an amazing life story. But I was a fan. And so, but he said at the end of the presentation, where he didn't know anybody, but he said, if anybody has any questions, my email is X, right? So I started emailing him, not every day, but I said, like, my name is Tommy Humphreys, and I would really like to, I'm a big fan of your story. I'm a shareholder, might have had 1,000 shares or something like that. I would really like to come with you on a site visit. Please let me know the dates. And he'd not respond. And then I would do it again and again. So when I saw him,
did you put your picture under your signature on your email to make it come over? No,
no, that might have been weird. But
okay.
But I did. Once in a while, he would respond, just say something. And then so when I was on the escalator in 2013 or 2014, I said, Mr. Friedland, I'm Tommy Humphreys. I've been emailing you. I'm really looking forward to coming on the site. And I was super nervous. And he said,
the Micro Machine Man. Do you remember the Micro Machine Man? For those of us, how fast he would talk. Okay, go ahead.
And he said something like, "Stay calm." Like, what's wrong? He was looking at me like I was but people recognize other people who are vibrating with energy, right? And I was absolutely determined. Robert Friedland is famous for the reality distortion field, and Steve Jobs as well. This concept, they just have the dream and they won't let it go, and the incredible things have happened. And it's a different discussion of faith and The Secret. That book, The Secret. But if there's one thing I would try to impart is that have a vision for yourself, right? And I had a vision. I was going to the Congo with Robert Friedland. I've got in the office, my wife framed it, but I had a vision that I was going to get this Katanga cross in the Congo. Katanga province is like the land of copper, and that's where Ivanhoe's projects are. And the Lundin family had this amazing Tange Fungurume project. But in the old days, in the 1800s, they would pour these copper crosses, and they were used as the currency. So you would trade a copper cross, a Katanga cross, for a pig or whatever. And so the unit of account in Katanga province was this little copper cross, these crude copper crosses. And I just had this vision. I was going to go there with Robert, and I was going to get one of these Katanga crosses. And the funny thing was, so I'm in Africa. I've never met him. I show up at this hotel, and all of a sudden I'm on his plane with his family, and we're going to South Africa, and it's so weird. And his son said, "What is a blogger doing here?" I really like his son, and his wife was incredible. And then I was so persistent when we were in the Congo. I was telling his team, I need to find this Katanga cross. I need to, and I wouldn't shop about it. And so sure enough, his team went and they got one for everybody on the trip. And because they're worth $1 or whatever there. But as we're leaving, the entire crew on this trip is given by Robert a Katanga cross, but it's literally because I had a vision in my dingy Vancouver apartment. I'm going to go to Congo with Robert Friedland. I'm going to get a Katanga cross. I'm going to show it to you. I've got it here.
Okay.
But if you have.
Oh, wow.
I want to break it. My wife framed it. I love her, but I got to break it out of here just because feeling it is so cool. But if you have a vision, you can work towards it. And if you vibrate towards it, what I'm talking about.
Okay, so if you have a vision, how do you balance that with not coming across as a weirdo? So I brought up, did you put your picture on your signature just so he would have that touch point, or he might see you? You said, no, that might be weird. So what's the balance between coming across as a weirdo, like, why does this guy have some vision about my company and he's a blogger, versus someone that takes initiative but maybe is not as forceful as you were?
Okay, I would say, like, secret one, part your hair like a conservative, nice boy. Okay. Like, so I had I didn't want to say professionalism because that's not true. But I tried to look smart, right? This power perceived as achieved thing. Like, when I had nothing, like, I had a better suit, before when I had nothing to my name than I do now. Not that I'm, super well off by any means, but I wore a blue suit. I showed up. I parted my hair, and I would take time to edit the communications I was putting out online. So I was very interested in them. I was showing the proof of what I was doing. I was direct. And how do you not be weird? I don't know. Some people are just weird.
Tommy, was your goal access to the people, to knowledge, to growing your Rolodex for when you had a question, or access to deals? Like, can you talk about some of your goals in taking all this ambition to develop your network?
My goal was to develop my knowledge and then to exploit it and to change my life and financial destiny. And there was a series of visions. And one of them was, I had a vision of Mount Rushmore in my head. And Mount Rushmore had, you could debate who belongs on this, but it was Robert Friedland, Lucas Lundin, Ross Beatty, and Frank Giustra. They were on my Mount Rushmore, the Mount Rushmore in my head. And I said, so as I'm going to start this journey, I'm going to meet these four people and I'm going to learn about them. It was very strong. I was like, I have to. So I start blogging about the goings on in the junior market. I didn't know anything. The last business post I wrote about my web design business was about junior mining, and I knew nothing, but like I was beginning to move this direction, but I started aggregating stories and just sharing online, tweeting the news and stuff. And there was a hole, and no one else was really doing it. A few people were. And so I was just like, I knew that, I thought that if I provided coverage of these four legends, that, selfishly, we're talking about the motive behind the motive. We were talking about that earlier. But like my motive was, I wanted to learn from them. I wanted to be associated with them. I wanted to use them as a springboard for an audience or leverage or whatever. I just wanted to see what made them tick, right? And it was really shocking to me that I didn't know any of these people. I'm sure I was 1 degree from, but I didn't know how. And within a year and a half of that vision, I was like, I had spent time intimately with all four of them. Intimate is the wrong word, but I had traveled with them all. And Robert was the last person that I met from that journey. And man, that was super inspiring to see. But a nobody, didn't know anything about the space, no capital, nothing behind me, but I was just posting and determined. And
if you weren't in Vancouver, would you have been able to get in the close proximity to these four gentlemen that you mentioned?
I think the answer with Robert is yes, I could have, because I never met Robert in Vancouver. I met him at PDAC on the escalator, right? But I did have the advantage of
which means you went to Toronto, right? So yeah. you weren't just behind the internet. You actually got out to meet these people.
You probably have to combine that with some of the others. Like through the conference I was doing with Cambridge House, I got an opportunity. A very nice, generous friend was Johnny Kovacevic. He was going to Europe with Ross Beatty and Amir Adnani, and I was like 6 months into this space, or maybe even less. And and Gianni asked if I could come and I could write about it for Cambridge House, and so I got to go on a roadshow with Ross and Amir, who were both wonderful, generous, fun, intelligent winners.
And that opportunity came because you were value adding, right? at that time?
I think I had
or they liked you, or they liked your ambition.
Well, I didn't know Amir and Ross, but Gianni was generous, and he thought that I deserved, help. And he was one of many people who didn't forbid their, like, there's some people hoard their networks, right? But Johnny was somebody who was like, he saw that I had a desire, and he was like, this could help. And so I wrote a story called Tommy and the Titans. I was like 26, and but I got to travel with Ross and Amir to these 3 different cities, and we were like riding the trains as they were going to tell their stories. And man, that was so inspiring. But there's some sort of like dominoes. It's like a network starts with Andrew Pollard in my friendship circle, and he gets into this field, and then I meet this guy Nolan, and then it's sort of like it grows one by one. And I guess it takes time, and it really helped for me that I was involved with this center of influence being the conference. There's a million ways to do this. You can create a center. Twitter is a center of influence. CEO.ca is a center of influence. But you get greater leverage by plugging into.
I mean, I love what you're saying. You're acknowledging that you got to where you are because other people were good to you when they didn't have to be good. Yeah, and you interviewed Rick and did a great interview about Ned Goodman, who I didn't know of. And
I didn't really either. I knew of him, but I didn't know the depth. Right?
But that's somebody that gave Rick Rule a hand up. Everybody, looks at Rick as the king master and, the man now, but you hear him talk in his 20s. There were a number of gentlemen that were really good to him to help get him to where he was. So that's another aspect to point out, right?
I talked to a friend of Rick's last week, not a close friend, but someone who knew him when Rick was 20 years old. And Rick, so I got a story last week about when Rick was a bouncer. And one thing he said was Rick was very aggressive. Like, he was aggressive for knowledge. He said he saw us drinking champagne and he was like, I'm smarter than these guys. But I think, being aggressive in your pursuit is critical. And I was aggressive.
So the mentor looks at the mentee and says, okay, he might be investable, right? In terms of my time and my effort.
Like Frank Justra, who I was one of these Mount Rushmore characters that I never met, but I was so inspired by him. And part of me was because he had this like grandiose track record and big house. And I was just like, how could somebody have all this stuff? And, so he was on the front page of the newspapers. I was like, wow. And he's friends with all these influential people. Like, that was what I wanted. That's not what I want. I'm different today. I'm not trying to be somebody else today as much. But I was so impressed with.
Okay, let me hit on that point, Tommy. How can listeners in this pursuit of a network remain themselves and not change who they are? And I'm speaking of more in a negative way, in pursuit of these relationships. Because, you could look at careers outside of junior mining where the person in their pursuit changes for the worst.
How could you not change yourself? I don't think you should. Authenticity is probably more viral or more attractive than, people know if you're contrived. I was contrived. Like, I was consciously trying to get to know these people. And so, like, it's like, what I look back, it's like, you're measured by how you treat someone who has nothing, not somebody who's a billionaire. Right. And I made a lot of mistakes in my career. One thing, like, I really believe, so I read this story about Richard Nixon, and Richard Nixon lost the election in 1960 to JFK and was supposed to be, done for. But he spent the 1960s doing favors for all the congressmen who were running, and he was just the old vice president that would come in and help put an election over the top. So he was like doing all this goodwill building with everybody throughout the entire 1960s. And he was the most helpful. And then when there's this vacuum in 1968, it was like Nixon's the one, and he filled the vacuum and became, forgive me for making Richard Nixon a positive role model example, but that story made me think of reciprocity. So like reciprocity is so powerful. And so a big part of my strategy was like, I just want to, if I build goodwill with all these people, like, so if for example, like Frank, I had never met him, but I had posted about him. I had asked people in interviews about him. And so like, I was curious. And then he had one of his companies had an oil discovery, and I had, I put the only story out about how this little junior had a discovery. So I was like trying to add value before I had the relationship. And I don't know if that's Nixonian or whatever, but that made it very difficult for him not to at least to have some curiosity, right? How do you keep your soul and be yourself? I think that's a really tough one.
Is there a good old boys network on Bay Street and Howe Street? And how would that affect an American trying to break in? I'm not asking you to speak negatively about anybody, but maybe just the way things are, just be realistic about it for an American retail investor trying to break in.
Like it depends on what's the definition of old boys club. Like it's
where you invest in and give favors and opportunity to your buddies or the kids of your buddies versus some Joe Schmo from a rural Nebraska that just got interested in mining stocks.
I think that the old boys club of Canadian mining finance is the people that stick around. They're kind of in some ways a little bit beat up, and they're always waiting for a new energy to come in, and that's their hope, and they're trying to exploit it. So you see a new face is extremely valuable in whether it's as an executive or with a project or somebody who's providing some research online. I think that there's always a willingness to find a new voice. And so I do believe that there's a ton of opportunity. How do you build a really strong relationship with someone if you don't meet them in person? I mean, it can go so far. Like you and I don't think we ever met in person. But I've watched so much of your content. Like, I don't know how tall you are. I would imagine you're very tall.
6'5". Yep.
Are you 6'5"?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
That explains a lot. But I mean, imagine if your audience knew you were 6'5", you'd have way more subscribers, right? But so the old boys club wants they need somebody new to play their game, right? And so everybody's sitting back and they're beat up and new energy. You need new life. Like if you're trying to get your money out of Vancouver and Toronto alone, your story is probably not going to get past a certain point. So it's a promoter or a project or whatever that can capture an audience that's greater. So I think that old boys club really recognizes that they need to connect outside of where they are.
So the kid from Nebraska has to bring a value add, but he also shouldn't be naive because he doesn't want to be exploited at the same time, because you use the word exploit. Yeah.
Well, by exploit, I mean, to profit from, to, load up on, fund him at 15 cents at the hope that he's going to, find more money at higher prices, or, get warrants or take fees or take his project. Like, it's business, right? It's like it's not as bad as the private equity industry. I read this book, Caesar's Palace Coup, recently about private equity industry, and it made me feel like, wow, these guys on Bay Street are actually kind in comparison to the high finance. But you saw this with Bill Ackman and Carl Icahn. Like, business is tough, and you have to expect. I used to say you need sharp elbows, and you need to expect that that not everybody's your friend or trying to do something. Self-interest is ruling the day. So yes, you can get on somebody's radar online. You can have a Zoom anywhere, but if you want to have a great relationship, at some point you want to spend time with them somehow. And site visits are great for that. Even though Frank was in Vancouver, my relationship with him, it really grew on an investor tour in Colombia, which I wrote about, called 72 Hours in Cartagena. It was my favorite post I ever wrote on my blog, and not one of the least read ones. But I think yeah, you can, you definitely can. And so regarding, you've heard and you've probably said the words "in the room, in the deal." Right. And if a company's public, obviously anybody can buy the shares, and that's not where that metaphor is appropriate for. It's like when something new is being started, or like I've said it before, that oftentimes these projects take several cycles to move from discovery to production. And so the first 10,000 meters of drilling happens. The stock will have its first run, and then the market will fall out of favor. And 6 years later, that company will be destroyed, and the shares will have to be consolidated, and all the money will be lost. And that has to happen where this boom and bust happens over 50 years, several times. And so a lot of shareholders are getting catching the wrong part of the cycle. But the point being is, like, those restarts are where the old boys are exploiting the market. It's like, okay, you got a project that someone bought in a downturn cheap that had a historical market cap. Like, I remember, like, this was maybe a poor analogy, was Sabina Gold and Silver had $1 billion valuation at the peak. And when Bruce McLeod came in as CEO, it was 50 or 60 million. And it had $500 million of drilling in it. And it had a huge gold resource. That was already public. He came into and it cleaned up, not that it was like, it didn't need a cleanup, but he came and reinvigorated that story. But there's just a ton of situations where projects are moving hands privately or between companies at a fraction of their historical investment. And there's a new leader and a new commodity theme or cycle. Like in Lithium X, which was one of my biggest successes, there was a lithium project that was drilled off by a junior that sort of failed. And they sold it for shares in our company for, I think it was $10 million of shares. They kept a piece of it and a royalty, which is there, so they had later upside, but we sold the project for $270 million. So that happened in less than 2 years, a year and a half. And that's not like an everyday situation, but the point is those restarts are where there's a new leader who's got access to capital and a new thesis about why this is going to work. And those new companies, or their restarts of an old one, that's often where he's like, it's in the room, in the deal. Or frankly, in Lithium X cases, we didn't know we would be able to get that project at the time, but I was in the room with people who were starting a company with a thesis. And so to be in the room, in the deal, like nobody's.
And how did you get to that room? Was it through Frank, or was it one of the 4 Mount Rushmore gentlemen? Is that how you got in the room?
In the case of the Lithium X, so it was 6 years after or 5 years after I had committed to the space, and I had introduced Frank to this person who introduced Brian, who was the CEO.
So you're a value add to Frank, you just said.
I think so, yeah. But at the same time, I also had a relationship with the CEO. I knew him. And so when Brian was trying to get Frank behind the vision, I got it right away. And I said, I want to help. Right. So I was there, and I was constructive, and I said, believe in this, like, let's try this. And so I got to be one of five or six shareholders at the outset, which was
and that was a $2 million win for you, Tommy, if I know your story, right? Or
not
2.5?
Quite, but close.
Yeah.
I mean, if I got I had some sales to purchase a house before the company was sold, but I did get to sell some at the final $270 a share price, and we started.
So you networked your way into a deal, yeah, which then was your first multi-7-figure win, right?
Yeah,
that's your hugest win, right, early on in your.
That was a game changer. I mean, I made probably $60,000 the year before, right? In 2015, well, maybe it wasn't that bad, but I felt like I made $60,000 somehow for 8 years, and then I had this sort of breakthrough with Lithium X. And at the same time, I've said this in other interviews, the market turned in 2016, and I had invested small scale in all these companies, and they all went up. And so I had a big year in 2016 that was completely life-changing. And anyway, so those restarts is like, how are you in the room on that sort of situation? I think you've got to come up with the idea yourself, or you've got to come up with a CEO, or you've got to be really, really, really plugged into it. It's not going to just happen. And no one's trying to put their son or their nephew. I mean, some people are, but and
they didn't let you in that room because you could write a big check at that time either, right?
No,
right?
No, they did because I believed in the idea. I was part of their social fabric of their relationship together. Like I was a conduit of their relationship to an extent. And I wasn't a big player. It was such a small thesis, a small deal at the start. And the market was so bad for so long that we didn't I didn't think we were going to get rich or anything. There was a deal called Pure Energy that was at 50 cents, and we got the ground around it. And it was like, oh, maybe we could get this to 50 cents. Who knows? And it turned out, we got to almost $3 and it sold because we used the ground around Pure in Nevada to then use the shares to acquire a project in Argentina that was real, that somebody else had failed on. And that's like the story of mining, is like,
so a neurology play bought True Value in a different country.
But something else where investors had funded, like mining is open source, built on the past failures, but it's not failure. It's like, it's just a brutal world. It's like you have to, takes forever to move projects forward. And also commodity prices may not be there when it's found. And so, you thank all the people that, you needed all the what came before it. But so at that moment, there was a special window, and I was there because I was a conduit to the relationship. I believed in it, and I also had this value add, which was that I had the CEO.ca site, and so I was basically introducing this new leader. I wrote a story about. I was a cheerleader, saying my story about. I was like, you've probably never met this guy, but I think if you met him, you'd give him the benefit of the doubt, because that's how I felt. I was like, he was a capable leader. But so you need new people. There's always room in any business for somebody who has the best customer service or tenacity. There's always room. It's never too late. But it's coming back to, how do you break into Mark Andreessen's circle in Silicon Valley? It's like hard. It's easier in junior mining, but the payoff's lower. Probably.
But it's served you well, though. The payoff.
Yeah, it's all
for you.
about the scale. Yeah. I mean, it's all about the scale, right?
Tell me, I've taken up an hour and 20 minutes or so of your time.
Up your hour.
No. I asked for this. This has been great, because you truly are a master networker. You've introduced me to people too, so thank you for that. Before you go, thebigscore.com, I want you to let listeners know, what is that about, and what are you trying to accomplish, and what's the value add for listeners at that website?
The value. Okay, what I'm trying to do with thebigscore.com is to do two things. I want to entertain. I want to add value. And so I'm very passionate about the history and the mining stories and some non-mining stories, but I want to share insights about our business in an entertaining package. And I want to learn about people like Ned Goodman, or the stories that there are hundreds of that are forgotten by history. And so I'm telling fun histories about wealth creation, mostly in the junior market. And I'm trying to include things that you wouldn't hear elsewhere, like insights about this business. So I think if you read it, you'll be entertained and you'll learn how this thing works. And I do it for selfish reasons. I really like it. It keeps me in front of those deal makers, and so I have a reason to be talking to everybody. Hey, could you tell me about this? It's as my self-interest is, I'm writing it so I can keep engaged in front of everybody. But also, after I sold my business a couple of years ago, I lacked a purpose and a community, and it's incredibly important, I think, for well-being, et cetera, to have both of those. And so I'm trying to build a community. I wish I was doing more. It's very exhaustive. Sometimes I spend, I almost worked 3 weeks full time on one story that I wrote for a John Goodman profile, because I just get lost in all these rabbit holes. But I'm passionate. I hope you're entertained, and we'll learn about how these deals are struck. And thebigscore.com, it's free. There's a slight benefits, like transcripts and a few exclusive pieces of content for paid subscribers, but mostly it's a hobby thing for me, and I want to be useful. I think Mining Stock Education has a really lock on adding value, and it's such an important thing. That's why, I don't want to say envy. I really admire the way that your business can be useful to so many people. And so in some ways, I'm knocking it off. I want to teach. And as you teach, you learn. And trying
Tommy,
to
you make those stories come alive in terms of, because I read almost everything you put out, and it's kind of like, oh, that's interesting, because there is the entertainment aspect, and
it has to be entertaining. Don't bore me,
Yep.
How many times have you had an interview with the CEO and you're like, that was tough? right? Like,
Yeah.
you wouldn't say, but
I guess the flip side of that too, though, is like in the junior mining sector where there is an information arbitrage, to quote Rick Rule, like if those are in hard pursuit of the facts, that's going to matter in this sector. If you're willing to sift through some of the boring, mundane stuff, you could possibly uncover a gem that others
absolutely right.
don't have the attention span to wait for or seek out.
I also think it brings an important, you have to have the patience for it to find a gem. And then on the flip side of it, there's no mining story that cannot be entertaining and persuasive. So be careful, because everybody has a great story. And, if you got sucked into every single one, on the whole, you're probably losing money. I think it would be the same of tech ventures that are started. It's like, it's an outliers situation. It's such a great privilege to talk to you, and thank you for having me, Bill.
Likewise, Tommy. Appreciate all the insights in an hour and 20 minutes.
Appreciate your audience.
Yeah, thank you. You've given people a lot to think about. Tommy Humphreys, master networker. Go take some of these things we talked about and implement them yourself.
Thank you, Bill. Tommy Hump on Twitter if you're there, and Tommy on CEO.ca. Great to be with you.